Warning: contains major spoilers for 28 years later, particularly around the size and girth of zombie penises. Zombie enthusiasts have been waiting a long time for 28 years later, 23 years in fact. But there's a problem, because Danny Boyle and Alex Garland didn't really make a sequel to their first film. What they made was an art house zombie film with very little connective tissue or similarities to either of the first two films, and now what might be called the 28 Days Later zombie franchise. And I think ultimately this is going to leave fans of the other films very disappointed, and we're going to look at why. Now please don't get me wrong, I have no problems with art house movies, to the point I'm quite willing to watch all 3 hours of Beau Was Afraid. Even the bit where he watches that play.
You will walk many miles. Dozens will become hundreds. Hundreds will become thousands. Your adventures will continue for years and years.
But the issue with creating an art house zombie film as part of a series of films which never had those art house sensibilities is that you are fucking with the audience expectations. And while sometimes it's very good to play with those expectations and subvert them, sometimes it leads to a disjointed film that is very tonally inconsistent, even within its own story. 1 minute, we're lamenting the loss of all those who lost their lives in the zombie apocalypse, and the next, we're watching a bunch of Irish parkour Jimmy Savile looking survivors cheerfully backflip their way across the screen, beating said zombies to death, which cannot in any way be taken seriously. But we'll get to the ending later. What is so jarring about the film is just how mismatched the tone is and how completely different it is to the original 28 Days Later, a harrowing, terrifying, refreshing take on the genre, which was largely responsible for reinvigorating zombie films over the last 20 years, encouraging a zombie renaissance, introducing fast zombies, and generally being the template for every other zombie film that followed. From the Dawn of the Dead remake to World War Z and most definitely The Walking Dead, they all owe a large debt to 28 Days Later, which is why 28 years later is so baffling, as it rejects so much of what made the original so good. And to explore why exactly this happened, we have to look at the creators. The two main players, Danny Boyle, the director, and Alex Garland, the writer. Danny Boyle won an Oscar for Slumdog Millionaire and previously exploded onto the scene with Shallow Grave and Trainspotting. Garland began his filmmaking career when his novel, The Beach, was adapted by Boyle into a feature film starring Leonardo DiCaprio. He then wrote 28 Days Later and went on to write and direct the critically acclaimed films like Ex Machina and Civil War, not the Marvel one. These men are heavyweights in the film industry with a pedigree of success and excellence that is hard to match. In fact, even the idea of an Oscar-winning director and a highly accomplished writer-director going back to revive a zombie franchise by making it a trilogy 20 plus years after the last film is and of itself somewhat of a bizarre anomaly. But then, making that film so weird and different from its predecessors also seems bizarre, until you delve a little bit deeper into Boyle and Garland's filmographies. While Boyle is the guy who made Slumdog Millionaire, 127 Hours, and Steve Jobs, he's also the guy who made Trance, a mind-bending thriller about someone with amnesia trying to remember where he hid the painting he stole, and a nude Rosario Dawson, which is by its very definition a bit of a mindfuck. He also directed Yesterday, where after being hit by a bus, a guy wakes up and realizes the Beatles no longer exist and he can steal all their songs and pretend that their music is his. Then there's Sunshine, which starts as a relatively straightforward sci-fi film about a team of astronauts sent into the depths of space to restart the dying sun, but quickly devolves into the surviving astronauts fighting one of their own team who's developed a god complex and become a sun zombie. This also should be noted was Garland and Boyle's last collaboration together. Now since that time, Alex Garland has himself become a writer-director who's made a series of critically acclaimed films, spearheaded by Ex Machina and Civil War and the TV series Devs. But in between those projects was decidedly more experimental offerings. Annihilation gets pretty fruity with that rainbow alien hybrid explore thing towards the end, and perhaps even stranger is the film Men, which has Rory Kinnear playing all the male roles, including a teenager, thanks to the use of some very disturbing CGI. None of these films are bad, but all of them are definitely to some degree or another weird, and a lot more art house than the filmmaker's more mainstream offerings. And what becomes apparent after about 28 odd minutes of 28 years later is that Garland and Boyle have brought all their weird art house sensibilities to it. They are in fact masquerading what normally would be a more popcorn style blockbuster zombie film and infusing it with a very strange bent. While there is nothing wrong exactly with this approach, it is very much at odds with the original 28 Days Later, which had many unique aspects but at the same time offered a pretty straightforward zombie survival tale. Here everything is amplified and exaggerated, which completely untethers it from the original's grounded tone. In the original, the threat of regular people infected with the rage virus was a terrifying proposition. Here, two of the main leads don't just run from a horde of rampaging zombies, they run from a rampaging zombie giant as an aurora borealis illuminates the night sky like some type of weird acid trip. And it's not just regular zombies anymore, this is an alpha, a sort of evolved, supersized super zombie with a giant dong swinging between its legs, which looks far more menacing than the alpha itself. I mean, we're all familiar with Dawn of the Dead, but Dongs of the Dead was not a sentence I thought might accurately sum up this film. Yes, there are a lot of zombie dongs in this film, and as a filmmaker, perhaps the first filmmaker to commit a zombie dong to screen in what might have been the first ever zombie infection via sexual transmission, I clearly don't have a problem with zombie penises. But like many things in this film, it's the exaggerated nature of it. Yes, we get it, he's an alpha, so naturally he's, shall we say, genetically gifted. But when you're bigger than this guy and you're running around chasing our protagonist with a baby holding an apple, it does seem on some level rather comical. It does border on the absurd, and if you thought Dr. Manhattan was too well endowed in The Watchmen, well, the alpha would like you to hold his beer. Or perhaps hold something else to stop it swinging so violently as it's pursuing you.
Swing, swing.
The concept of the alpha zombie is meant to show the evolution of those who contract the rage virus, a larger, scarier version of the originals. Bigger, bolder, and uncut. But this evolution has quite the opposite effect. Less scary, more silly, and in fact, perhaps the worst part of this concept is that Zack Snyder already introduced this idea of alpha zombies and sort of zombie captains in Army of the Dead, a zombie film that was quite terrible in all respects. Needless to say, in both films, it doesn't hit the way they intended. Also, speaking of hitting, in this world the rage zombies have evolved, presumably to the point of coitus. Yep, apparently zombies fuck now. Zombies get pregnant and zombies have babies. If any of this concerns you, then you're probably not gonna like the way this plot point plays out. The story starts normally enough following 12-year-old Spike and his mother and father who live on an island removed from the British mainland, which is still overrun by these horny zombies. The island is peaceful. They are protected by large gates and the tides, which only make it possible to cross when the tide is low. The definition of a gated community which lives off the land to survive. Each person has a job. Each person services the island. This island of survivors has sprouted up directly from the events of 28 Days Later, and they live in a state of relative peace. But some members of the island must venture onto the mainland to presumably forage and scavenge from the old world and bring back whatever they find for their community. Spike will make his first trip with his dad Jamie to the mainland and make his first kill as a form of induction and to make a man of him. As far as post-apocalyptic scenarios go, this all seems pretty reasonable. But upon Spike's first foray to the mainland, things start to become less and less consistent with the introduction of the first alpha. After a narrow escape, Spike has a falling out with his dad and decides to take his mother, who is sick and hallucinating, across to the rage-infested mainland in hopes of finding a rumored doctor who is said to live there and for that doctor to cure his mum. It's on this new pilgrimage where the believability of all the events unfolding starts to fray, and ignoring the fact that Spike's plan is incredibly misguided and stupid and quite obviously doomed to fail, their adventures consistently seem to land outside the realms of believability. From surviving a gas leak explosion, which would have definitely killed them, to helping an infected, pregnant zombie woman give birth to an uninfected baby, and drugging an alpha with spiked morphine darts, but not killing him when he's passed out from these darts. Each new bizarre scenario seems more outlandish than the last, and it's often very confusing as to what emotion we, the audience, should be feeling. It also doesn't help that Boyle's song choices seem to constantly contradict the action. The effectiveness of sequences that should rely entirely on ambience and sound design are completely destroyed by blaring punk rock tracks that run counterintuitively to the action, and the music is a jarring, ugly clash with the moments they accompany. Much the same way the tone of this film seems to clash directly with the established tone of 28 Days Later and even 28 Weeks Later.
It doesn't feel like a sequel, it feels like an original film.
Even now, the iconic trailer sequence scored to a poem by Rudyard Kipling even this sequence in the film is pointless. It seems very out of context. It's simply pasted over a travel montage. It doesn't really achieve anything, and it doesn't achieve anything probably because originally it was never conceived to be part of this film. The Memento Mori sequence, where Spike discovers the bone towers built by the Doctor, which is the film's sort of climax and something that I thought was quite emotional and profound, an interesting meditation on mortality and a window into the devastating toll on humanity that this zombie apocalypse has created, is then bookended by the actual ending, the arrival of the Irish parkour Jimmy Savile gang, who help Spike and take him presumably into a new community and a new adventure, directly setting up the already completed sequel to this film. Many have been critical of these characters being inspired by Jimmy Savile, a horrific abuser and monster who lived his entire life escaping persecution for his actions and died a beloved British figure before the extent of his wrongdoings were revealed posthumously. But as has been explained in interviews, that was kind of the point. If the events of 28 Days Later happened back in 2001, these characters would only know the beloved public version of Saville at the time of his death and have subsequently paid tribute to a false idol. Or they're a gang of pedos, which will be revealed in the next film. I mean, who can say? I am not critical of this particular choice, but I am very critical of the entire scene looking like a fight sequence from an episode of Power Rangers. I am critical of the fact that this is essentially a far worse version of a Marvel post-credit scene, but pre-credits. I'm critical of it destroying the reality of the world of 28 years later, and I am critical of the idea that it essentially means the film has no ending, just a 1960s Batman style tune in tomorrow.
One hint, the worst is yet to come.
And the scene itself is in fact tonally not dissimilar to the campy nature of the Batman TV series, except this isn't the 1960s Batman. This is meant to be a chilling, post-apocalyptic world full of dangerous rage zombies. You will never find a tonal mismatch so great between two scenes. I speak respectfully as a 28x Later fan when I say this has absolutely no place in this franchise, nor any quote-unquote serious zombie film. And I get that Danny Boyle and Garland do love to fuck with tone, but they fucked with the tone so much with this end scene that they fucked the tone. And much has been made of the fact that this film was largely filmed on iPhones, albeit often iPhones with $100,000 anamorphic lenses attached to them. And look, it is a neat trick that harkens back to the original 28 Days Later being filmed on Canon XL1 digital cameras rather than traditional cinema cameras in order to provide a much grittier, more unpolished feel that fit perfectly with the apocalyptic concept. 28 Years Later doesn't really recreate that aesthetic, and these hybrid iPhone rigs feel much closer to traditional cinema cameras in terms of their look, but I still applaud the bold choice and appreciate the fact that Boyle constantly pushes the envelope when it comes to the unconventional camera formats he uses to encourage these bolder aesthetics. In fact, it will be interesting to see what this film ultimately will become known for. The heavy use of iPhones in a big budget Hollywood film, or creating the biggest zombie wang in cinema history.
What Danny likes is subversion. That's the kind of thing that wakes Danny up.
If you look at this film without having seen 28 Days Later or 28 Weeks Later, but simply as a standalone, slightly art house, post-apocalyptic film with the occasional zombie in it, you'll probably have a good time. If you watch this film as a fan of the previous films and the zombie genre, expecting to get more of the same, you'll probably be very disappointed because there is very little connection between this and the previous installments, and in fact, very few actual zombies in this film. Ultimately, the first film, and to a slightly lesser extent the second film, were both white-knuckle thrill rides full of tense, scary, gritty zombie action built around believable-ish characters. Contrary to the very concept of the alphas, the zombie elements in this zombie film are very flaccid. If you want to know how best to equip yourself for the oncoming zombie apocalypse in the comments section, your best bet is subscribing to this channel for more hot takes on pop culture and cinema, which should keep you distracted as Dirk Diggler zombies storm your fortified underground bunker. And no, that's not a metaphor, but for the love of God, whatever you do, don't let them get into your stash of Viagra.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Stop it! You're ignorant.
They're coming for you, Barbara.
Stop it! You're acting like a child.
They're coming for you. Look, there comes one of them now.